Hey there, this is Ty from TableFlipFoundry.com. Today we're going to be talking about how to hollow your 3D printable models in Lychee Slicer. We're going to go over the hows and whys and whens of hollowing and placing holes. We're also going to talk about some safety involved with that. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, here we are in Lychee Slicer. We're going to work on a base to start, and what we're going to talk about is understanding when and why and how to do hollowing with holes. What benefits it has, what difficulties it has, and it'll help you make decisions about whether or not hollowing is the right move for you. So the first thing we're going to look at is this base, and we notice that this base has it's very thick. It would take a lot of resin in order to print something like this. So if we look at it, we can see that this base would take almost 67 milliliters of resin. So for starters, it's like we always want to use as few of the materials as possible. It costs us less money, but it also can affect our pre-support work quite a bit. So when we're adding supports to our model, we have to overcome suction forces of the model. So when we start to look at it, when we look at any given layer, so this is layer 525, we notice that there's a huge amount of white area in this model here. Well, this white area is the amount of resin that is going to be connected to your FEP on that layer. And as we go up layers, so we notice that this surface area can get bigger and bigger, especially on a model like this. Well, that can be very difficult to overcome the forces of your resin pulling off the FEP with them holding on to some supports underneath. We can do it, but we can also make this much easier on ourselves. So this is a scenario where we would look at hollowing. So over on the left, we're going to go to the hollow tab. You have to be in the prepare or support tab in Lychee, and we're going to look at hollowing. So here you see we have a few different options: holes, hollowing 3D, hollowing 2D, and blockers. All right. If you have Lychee Pro, you have access to hollowing 3D. This is what I'm going to be working in today. You can do the same things with hollowing 2D, but you won't be able to see them. And I want to show you what's going on in here today. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look at hollowing 3D. And we're going to make our thickness 2 millimeters. So that thickness is how thick the walls of the hollow are. So you can see here, this wall is 2 millimeters thick. If I wanted to have something a little thicker, we can do 3 millimeters, and you'll see this change to a much fatter wall. So it just depends on what you want. I actually do 1.8 mostly when I do mine. So I'm going to set it to 1.8. We're going to do the wall. Perfect. So now we look at how much white area there is. We know that the white area is the amount of resin connected to the FEP on any given layer, and the more resin, the more difficulty it is to pull off the FEP sheet. So with this hollow, we can see the difference is huge compared to without the hollow. This will make doing supports, it'll increase our success rate using pre-supports, and it will decrease the amount of supports we need in order to do the supports on this particular model. The less supports there are, the less damage there are to the model. Now in this case, we know it's a base, so damage is probably not so much of an issue because all the damage will be on the bottom, which you don't see anyway. But when we look at the next model, it's a little harder to hide some of that damage. So in this case, way less suction force applied as a result of resin on the FEP. But what we have done is we have increased the amount of suction force by creating a sort of like a vacuum, a negative space, a suction cup, right? So when the printer starts to print, it will create a seal around this white area on the FEP. And then when it tries to pull off, the empty space in here will create sort of like a plunger or a suction cup and actually increase the amount of forces. So what we need to do is alleviate that vacuum, and the way we do that is through holes. Now it's really important to note that since this model is empty, we will need to add holes so that we can clean out the inside when it's done. But the location of that hole, or at least the very first hole, is very important. We want to alleviate that suction force as quickly as possible. So when we have our model set up on this build plate, we need to add a hole to the very lowest location we can. Okay, in this case, it's going to be tucked into these little grooves here. So I'm going to come up to the Holes tab. The absolute minimum hole size, as per my rules, the absolute minimum hole size needs to be at least 2 millimeters. Now, if you do all of your holes at 2 millimeters, you're going to find it difficult to get any sort of cleaning solution inside. I use isopropyl, so I have a hard time getting isopropyl to enter a 2 millimeter hole. So I always use like a 4 or 5 millimeter hole whenever I can. But in some cases, you'll find you can't fit a hole that big. In this case, all we care about is getting a hole as low as possible. We want to alleviate suction force first. The cleaning part, if we have room, we're going to add bigger holes somewhere else, and isopropyl will go in there just fine. But at the very least, a 2 millimeter hole at the lowest point will prevent suction force problems. So I noticed that there's 2 different locations here we can probably get a hole in where we can alleviate suction forces as fast as possible. So you can see there's a little pocket here and a little pocket there. And now that we have holes, those little pockets don't become suction cups. And that's enough to overcome it. So now that we don't have suction cups, we've gone from having a huge amount of resin contact with the FEP to very little amount of resin contact with the FEP. And for the purposes of holding on to that model, this is the best of all worlds here. So now that we have that done, the next step is to create holes for cleaning. And this is where I like to create like a nice big hole, especially on a model like this. Make sure you don't select the wrong holes. Here we go. So we're going to create like a 5 millimeter hole. And for the most part, you don't have to be particular about where you place them. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of evenly place holes around. And the way I do this is one hole would be enough. Sometimes the hole will be in the wrong location. Lychee will tell you when. Sometimes one hole will be good enough, and that's totally okay. But I find that when I put this into the cleaner, it fills up much faster when there's many holes. It just makes the whole process much easier for me. So no matter which direction I drop this into my cleaner, it's going to fill up right away. It won't float. It won't bubble. And that helps me get as much of the uncured resin out of the inside. So here we go. We tilted our model, which we know we need to do. We placed holes at the lowest part of the suction cup, and then we place some bigger holes around the rest of the model to help clean everything out, which is really important. But we're not quite done. It's really important to note that when you hollow a model, you're also creating new islands inside of the model. So we know that when we do supports on a regular model, there's going to be islands everywhere that need supports. But oftentimes we can forget that the inside of the model is going to have new islands. So when we go, let's see if I can get inside here. When we go inside of the model, we can see that there's now surface area in here, and there will be islands that exist inside of this model that need to be supported. So there's an island, and we need to make sure we add supports. Now on the inside of the model, there's no contact damage. We don't have to increase or we don't have to pull these out or anything like that. So I always use heavies. What you can do also to make it even stronger is to increase the size of the tip of the heavy to match the size of the diameter of the pillar. You can do it either way. I do heavies, but this is also a good method. So you can run an island detector. This will take a couple of seconds here. All right, so while we're waiting for that island scan, I want to address the topic of safety and resin handling. We know resin isn't really very healthy to handle or to have, spilled or on your hands or skin. With that in mind, it's really important that we take a few seconds and we talk about when we're using the hollowing function, how to make sure that we keep ourselves safe. If we hollow a model and we don't add holes, aside from suction and aside from anything else, if we don't add holes and we print that model hollow and we take that model and we put it on a shelf, what will happen is the resin inside will continue to cure very slowly. And when it does that, it emits gases and that expands inside of the little model that you've created, essentially creating a resin balloon. Over a few months, what will happen is the expansion will continue to happen until that balloon pops. And it will sound like a gunshot or a firework going off in your house. It's very loud, and it will blow open and crack. And all of a sudden, it will start leaking uncured resin onto whatever shelf that it's sitting on. And if you have kids, or if people don't know around it, it can be unsafe to have that happen. So it is extremely important that we make sure that no matter what, there is at least one hole available to clean the inside of the model and ensure that there is no expanding gases inside of that model. So even though you can fill the holes in afterwards, you might be able to use green stuff, you can use more resin, you need to ensure that there is at least one place that expanding gases can escape so that you don't have this little toxic bomb sitting on a shelf somewhere. So please, 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 you can haul your models. It's an excellent thing to do. Just make sure there's at least that one hole. Let's get back to the class. Okay, so our island scan is done here, and you'll notice we now have new islands inside of the model. If I didn't support this whole section of the model would go flat, and it could fail on the other side, which is the part we care about. So it's really important we come in and we make sure we support these heavily. And we don't have to be very picky about our placement or anything like that. We just want to make sure that every one of these islands gets really well supported. So I just go in with heavies and I place a ton of them. And then I do try to miss the holes whenever I can. So we're going to want to be really thorough about this. It can be a little difficult to control the camera inside of the model. We just do our best here. There's another one up there. And that turned into a mini support. We're going to change it into a nice big one. Remember, I don't really care how fat or small or difficult or any of that these supports are. We just want to make sure it's providing what's necessary for that island to print. All right, that looks like all of our internal islands are done. And we're finished with the hollowing on this model. We would want to do the rest of the supports, but that's another video. So what did we do? What did we accomplish here? We ended up saving resin. Remember, it was something like 67 milliliters of resin. Now it's less than half. So it's only 27 milliliters of resin here. So we saved ourselves some money. And we didn't have to use as many supports in order to hold up the same amount of model, because we have way less contact with the model as when it's hollow as when it's solid, right? So we know that the amount of contact with the FEP is lessened by a great amount when the model is hollowed. We have alleviated the amount of supports necessary, which means we've alleviated the amount of damage to the model. We've saved ourselves a ton of resin, and we've also made sure to add enough holes to make the inside of this model nice and clean. Now, if you're extra cautious, a lot of people will find a little teeny UV light and they can shine that little light inside and cure the inside. I don't do that on my models. I don't think it's necessary, but if you feel like doing it, that's definitely something you can look into. They have little teeny lights that you can put in there, or you can make a much larger hole and get yourself a little room to put a flashlight in there or something like that. So that's totally your prerogative. So this was a base. Let's take a look at something a little more complex. Let's find another model here. All right, so we have a model here by Velrock Art, and this model has like a little cross section in the middle where we start to see some really heavy suction forces start to take place, where our contact with the FEP is very heavy. And we may decide that we want to hollow this model, try to make this as easy as possible to support. But we're also going to notice that there's a lot of areas in this model we may not want hollow. And so we're going to look into how we can make this as hollow or not hollow as we want it. So we're going to start off again. I'm going to do my typical 1.8, and then let's have a look at it. See how much of this model actually hollowed. So we can see that the feet and legs and tail start to hollow right away. And then that hollow goes all the way up into the body. We can see these axes right here start to hollow. And then the axes close, so we know that we can't put holes in the axes, or we don't want to, so we're going to choose not to hollow those. We can see that the arms start to get hollow way down low, but we know that we're not going to want to put holes in the arms, and so we don't want those arms hollow either. But we do know that right about here, we definitely want to hollow this as much as possible. We can alleviate a lot of that suction. And then obviously all the way up into the wings, none of the wings hollow. So, but we do know that from the very tip of the foot and the tail, all the way up into the body is one big cavity. And this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna hollow this body from the feet to the head, but we need to stop the arms and the axes from hollowing. So we're going to use this option at the top right called blockers. Now these objects that we're going to place on the build plate will actually prevent the model from hollowing wherever these objects are. So we're using them as markers for areas that we don't want Lychee to hollow our model. And we know that we want the axes and we want the arms to not hollow. So we're going to place this blocker, something like that. We're a little too tall here. There we go. Move it up a bit. All right, we know that that's not hollow on its own. We hollowed at the shoulder. And so now when we update the model and we come back through, we're going to see this nice crisp line when we look at our hollowing. So right here, you can see the blocker prevented the shoulder from hollowing on this left side. And then it also prevented the entire arm and the entire axe from going hollow as well. So we can choose like where and when we want these, the hollowing to take place or not take place. I know this uses more resin, and that's okay with me because of the location. We can be a little more precise about it. So we're going to go ahead and add a blocker to the next hole, or to the next side here. We're going to kind of scale this up to a point where we want it. Oops. Like this. I know I want to keep the leg hollow, so we're going to move it up and try to avoid the leg. And then we need the whole axe in it. All right. So we might tilt this a little bit, move it out, tilt it back. We'll just play with it a little bit. Now, if it turns out that this cube is just the wrong shape, we can go ahead and grab a ball instead and scale the ball up if we want to. I'll just grab this middle. Well, that's location. All right, here's a ball. We'll just scale it this way, like this. By using this different shape, we'll give ourselves a better, a better option for maybe missing this leg, which is kind of what we're going for. Yeah, here we go. All right, so the whole axe is in there. I know that this doesn't go hollow, so I don't have to worry about it. It goes all the way up to the shoulder, and that's fine. A little bit of this horn, but the horn doesn't hollow anyway. So we're going to go ahead and update, and we can go back to the file and let's have a look here. And there we go. See, my shoulder didn't hollow at all because of the blocker. So now I know I have one solid chunk that is empty in the middle, and we have to add our drainage holes or our suction holes or whatever we want to call them. So I find that doing this 3D hollow allows me to look from the inside and place my hole from the inside, so I know where the suction starts. sometimes if you do it from the outside, it can be very difficult to find the exact location of where we need to place that hole. Now you'll notice these holes all turn red. The reason they're turning red is because they overlap the mesh in the wrong way. So I find that by doing it from the top, I can precisely locate those holes to go through the bottom of the foot, and then I don't have any issues. But we have this tail to deal with, so we need to come over here. So let's go ahead and add a suction there. We might have to move it around, play with it. All right, it's getting a little tight. There we go. That looks good. So that'll provide us a nice drainage hole right away. If we can get it to fit on the flat of the tail, there we are. That'll be perfect right there. So that'll fit on the flat part of the tail. We know that flat part is meant to be on the table, so it'll always be hidden. And now we have, at the very least, a way for air to get inside and alleviate that suction cup. But we also know that these little holes can be very difficult to clean the inside of the model with. So we might need to be selective about where we locate holes for cleaning. Maybe we can increase the size of these. Maybe 2.5 will work. All right, that didn't turn red on me. That still looks okay. Maybe 3 millimeters will work. So we want to, there we go. We can do 3 millimeters on these. That will help us get isopropyl inside. Maybe even 4 millimeters will work. All right, so we see at 4 millimeters, we've started to overlap the hole with the mesh of the model. So here we're going to start see how we've exceeded the amount of space we have. So we're going to go back to 3.5 and let's see if that works. And then we're going to detect. There we go. So we've made that hole as large as we can fit. That'll give us the best opportunity to get isopropyl inside. The other thing we can look at that might be helpful is, even though there are no flat spots that touch the base, like this is always the best location, but it's not the only location. We know that when you're looking at the model, we're usually looking from this perspective. It's sitting on a table in front of us, and we're looking at it from one of these directions around the top of the model. So we know we can probably hide, you know, a support up under the leg or something like that. Like we might be able to hide a hole up here. So let's say a 3 millimeter hole here and a 3 millimeter hole here, right? Because that is not very visible, it's very unlikely you'll ever even notice the holes were there, but it gives us a little more room to add in isopropyl and clean and drain and do all of that. So what you're going to be looking for as a clever location, we could even look at maybe under the armpits like this. If we could find a good location up under there that worked, where you just wouldn't see it. Then after the model is done, we could go in, drop a little droplet of resin inside of that and recure it and close up those holes after it's clean. So the most important part is we have to at least leave one hole afterwards. So we just want to make sure we don't close up all of them, even though you can. We have to leave one air hole after we're done cleaning and all of that. So this is how I would do a more complex model. We use blockers, we hid some holes in some choice locations, we increased the hole size to the biggest we could fit it in there, and I would be very comfortable printing this model hollow at this point. So that's it, you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you learned a little bit in this video. Feel free to check out my other videos. I teach 3D printing classes, support classes. I try to add content as often as I can carve out time for. So if you like this content, you want to see more, obviously, like, subscribe, do all of that stuff, leave me comments. Also, make sure to check out our website, TableFlipFoundry.com. And if you like this type of hobby, 3D printing, tabletop gaming, any of that stuff, you should really check out our Discord. We just broke 900 members in our community. Everybody is super nice. If you want to show off something, that's the place to show it off. If you're having troubles printing, we've got tons of people who are willing to help. So I really encourage you to come visit us over on Discord, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.